Hip-hop has buried more legends than any genre should ever have to. From drive-bys on the Vegas Strip to broad daylight executions outside cookie shops, the pattern never stops repeating. Today, I'm breaking down every rapper who got murdered at the absolute peak of their powers, starting with the one that changed everything, Tupac Shakur. Born June 16, 1971 in East Harlem to Black Panther member Afeni Shakur, Tupac was political before he ever touched a microphone. He studied at the Baltimore School for the Arts, broke out through Digital Underground, and became the most magnetic figure in rap within 4 years. Me Against the World debuted #1 on Billboard while he was sitting in a prison cell. That actually happened, but the Quad Studios shooting in 1994 broke something in him. 5 bullets in a New York lobby, and he came out convinced everyone had set him up. When Suge Knight posted his bail and signed him to death row, it created the most combustible mix in music history. A furious rapper with a martyr complex, backed by a label with deep gang ties. All Eyes on Me dropped in 1996, double album, Commercial Juggernaut, September 7th, 1996. After the Tyson Seldon fight at the MGM Grand, surveillance cameras capture Tupac's entourage beating Orlando Anderson in the lobby. Hours later, at Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulls up at a red light. Someone opens fire. He survived 6 days, died September 13, 25 years old. The case went uncharged for decades, spawning conspiracy theories fueled by his Machiavelli persona. The real tragedy isn't the conspiracies. It's the volume of posthumous albums proving how much he had left to give. But if Tupac's death shook the world, what happened 6 months later in Los Angeles proved it wasn't isolated. It was a pattern, the notorious Big. Here's something most people forget. Biggie and Tupac were friends. Genuine, actual friends. Before the Quad Studios shooting in 1994, before the diss tracks and the magazine covers pitting coast against coast, these two were cool, and then everything fell apart, and less than 3 years later, both of them were dead, which is, not ideal. Christopher Wallace grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and by his early 20s, he'd changed the entire trajectory of East Coast hip-hop. Sean Combs signed him to Bad Boy, and in 1994, Ready to Die hit like a freight train. Juicy and Big Papa crossed over to mainstream radio without him dumbing down a single bar. The man could rap about champagne wishes and crack corner nightmares in the same verse and make both sound like poetry. Then on March 9, 1997, he's sitting at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, leaving a Vibe magazine party, and a dark Chevrolet Impala pulls up alongside his SUV. Someone opens fire. 24 years old, less than 6 months after Tupac. Here's where it gets complicated. This happened on a busy street. Cars everywhere, people everywhere, and somehow zero convictions. The investigation turned into a mess of LAPD corruption allegations, theories about off-duty officers moonlighting as death row security, and civil suits that dragged on for years. Not a single documentary or book can agree on what actually happened that night. Life After Death dropped 16 days later, went diamond. The title became horrifyingly prophetic, but the music revealed an artist who was just getting started. Instead, we got one finished album and a ghost. But if Biggie's death proved that even the biggest name in rap wasn't safe on a public street, the next one proves you didn't need to be famous at all. You just needed to be talented and standing in the wrong place in Harlem. Big L. Here's something that should bother you. Ask any rapper from the late 90s who the best lyricist in New York was, and a disturbing number of them won't say Biggie. They won't say Nas. They'll say Big L, a guy most people have never heard of. Born in Harlem in 1974, Lamont Coleman built his reputation by showing up to the Stretch and Bobito radio show and freestyling so viciously that the recording still circulates like a holy text among rap nerds. His style was intricate, technically absurd, and had this dark, comedic edge where every punchline felt like it was written by someone who found violence genuinely funny, which is, not ideal, but it worked. His debut album dropped in 1995 and made him a cult favorite without ever making him rich. Columbia Records had zero idea how to market a guy whose appeal was he raps better than everyone alive, so the album underperformed and L got shelved. By 1999, he'd formed Children of the Corn with pre-fame Maze and Cam'ron, was in talks with Rockefeller Records, and had material ready for a second album. The shot was loading. On February 15, 1999, Big L was shot multiple times in the head and back on 139th Street in Harlem. He was 24. The precision indicated a targeted hit. A suspect with connections to L's own family was arrested, but charges were dropped. Nobody has ever been convicted. His posthumous album confirmed what everyone feared. He was about to arrive. And unlike Pac or Biggie, Big L never even got his moment. He wasn't taken from the top, he was taken from the doorstep. His murder had nothing to do with any coastal beef. It was local, deeply, quietly local. But if a targeted hit in Harlem feels personal, wait until you hear about a murder that happened inside a recording studio in Queens. Jam Master Jay. Here's something that never sat right with people. Jam Master Jay wasn't a gangsta rapper. He wasn't beefing with anyone publicly. He was the DJ for Run DMC, the group that made your parents think hip-hop was fun. The guy helped make Walk This Way happen with Aerosmith, essentially kicking the door open for rap on MTV. He was a pioneer of the genre's accessible phase, and someone walked into his own studio and shot him in the head October 30th, 2002. Two armed men entered Jay's recording studio in Jamaica, Queens, and fired at close range. He was 37 years old. This wasn't a drive-by or a club altercation. This was his workspace, the place where he mentored young artists, where he famously helped introduce a kid named Curtis Jackson to the industry before 50 Cent was a household name. That studio was supposed to be sanctuary, and then nothing happened. For 18 years, the case went completely cold. No arrests, no public suspects. One of hip-hop's founding architects murdered in front of witnesses, and the justice system just shrugged. It wasn't until 2020 that federal prosecutors finally announced indictments. The alleged motive? Retaliation for being cut out of a cocaine distribution deal. The same hands that scratched records on King of Rock were allegedly connected to narcotics, which is, not ideal. That's the part that complicates the legacy. Jay wasn't killed over a diss track or a coast war. He was killed over product. It shattered the comfortable idea that only rappers who glorified violence were vulnerable to it. Turns out, the intersection of music money and street money doesn't care about your public image. But if you think Jay's case took a long time to crack, wait until you hear about an artist whose murder played out on camera in broad daylight, and people still argued about what it meant. XXXTentacion. Here's the thing about X. No rapper in modern history has been this polarizing while alive, and somehow even more polarizing after death. He was 20 years old, mass appeal famous for barely a year, and the internet still can't decide if he was a tortured genius mid-redemption or someone who escaped accountability by dying young. Jose Onfroy came out of Plantation, Florida, with music that sounded like it was recorded inside a panic attack. Look at Me wasn't polished. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a SoundCloud track that exploded because it captured something traditional. Rap wasn't giving internet native kids pure, unfiltered emotional chaos. But then his debut album, 17, dropped, and instead of more screaming, you got acoustic guitars and vulnerability. Songs like Jocelyn Flores and Sad were confessionals about depression, and millions of young listeners felt genuinely seen. The follow-up debuted at number 1. He was evolving faster than anyone expected. Simultaneously, court documents detailed allegations of severe physical abuse from a former partner, not vague accusations. Specific, disturbing claims that created a fan base split down the middle, one side arguing transformation, the other saying, you can't separate art from artist when the artist allegedly caused so much pain. On June 18, 2018, he was shot and killed outside a motorcycle dealership in Deerfield Beach, Florida, a robbery. He was reportedly carrying around $50,000 in cash. 4 suspects were charged with first-degree murder. Surveillance footage made this one of the fastest solved rapper murders in history, which is a grim contrast to the decades-long mysteries of the 90s. He died at 20, mid-pivot. Was accountability foreclosed by his murder, or was transformation genuinely underway? I don't know what to tell you. Nobody does. But if X's legacy is complicated by who he was, the next artist's legacy is complicated by how universally beloved he was, and how that still wasn't enough to protect him. Nipsey Hussle. Here's the thing about Nipsey Hussle. Most rappers talk about giving back to their communities. Nipsey actually did it, and it's what got him killed. Ermias Asghedom grew up in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles, half Eritrean, fully embedded in the streets. He was affiliated with the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips, one of the largest gangs in the city. But somewhere along the way, Nipsey decided that repping his block meant more than just claiming it. It meant owning it, literally. He sold his Crenshaw mixtape for $100 a copy, not as a gimmick, as a statement. Jay-Z bought multiple copies. The message landed. Then in February 2018, after years of grinding independently, Victory Lap finally arrived. Grammy nomination, critical acclaim, the validation that everyone outside his fanbase needed to understand what his people already knew. Nipsey Hussle was the real thing, and here's where it gets cruel. Just over a year later, on March 31st, 2019, he was shot and killed at age 33 outside his own Marathon clothing store. At the intersection of Slauson and Crenshaw, the exact spot he'd transformed from a place where he once sold CDs out of his trunk into a symbol of black economic empowerment. The man who built that corner up was gunned down on it. Eric Holder, a man from the same neighborhood, shot him after Nipsey reportedly confronted him about rumors of cooperating with law enforcement. Holder was convicted of murder, but that resolution doesn't resolve anything, not really. The paradox is suffocating. Nipsey's whole philosophy was about staying present, staying accessible, reinvesting where he came from, STEM programs, financial literacy, prison reform advocacy. He wasn't just rapping about change, he was physically standing in the middle of it every single day, and that's exactly what made him vulnerable. Victory Lap took years of patience to arrive. He barely got to live in its legacy. But if Nipsey's story is about what happens when you refuse to leave your community behind, the next one is about what happens when fame finds you before you even have time to build one. Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke had zero business being as famous as he was at 20 years old. Born Bashar Jackson in Brooklyn, he grabbed a sound that was brewing across the Atlantic, those sliding UK drill bass lines and menacing 808 mellow productions, and dropped it on top of the deepest voice in rap. The result was Welcome to the Party in 2019, a track that sounded like nothing else coming out of New York at the time. Within months, he went from a local Brooklyn figure to one of the most talked about artists in the country. The speed of it was almost comical. Meet the Woo dropped, blew up. Meet the Woo 2 dropped, blew up harder. He was building a transatlantic bridge between Brooklyn and London production in real time, creating a sound that an entire generation of New York rappers would immediately adopt. The man had been famous for less than a year. On February 19th, 2020, Pop Smoke was shot and killed during a home invasion at a rented house in the Hollywood Hills. He was 20 years old. Social media posts from the property had inadvertently revealed the address, essentially broadcasting the location of a wealthy young rapper and his luxury items to anyone paying attention. The assailants were teenagers, kids robbing and killing another kid over material goods. That's the part that sits with you, the cyclical nature of it. Youth destroying youth, economic desperation weaponized against someone who'd barely had time to enjoy what he'd earned. His posthumous debut, Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon, executive produced by 50 Cent, debuted at #1 on Billboard. And the album wasn't just a tribute project held together by goodwill, it mapped out genuine career paths, deeper drill cuts alongside melodic crossovers that proved he had legitimate superstar range. Every single one of those directions became a hypothetical. We'll never know which one he would have chosen, but if Pop Smoke's story is about potential cut short by proximity and exposure, the next one is about a rapper whose own lyrics seem to narrate his fate in real time. King Von. King Von released his debut album and was dead within a week. Welcome to O Block dropped on October 30th, 2020. He was shot and killed on November 6th, 7 days between breakthrough and burial. Here's the thing about Von. He wasn't just rapping about street life. He was narrating it like a film director trapped inside the story. The Crazy Story series didn't sound like songs. They sounded like first-person crime thrillers with plot twists and cliffhangers. You'd genuinely not know how the story ended until the final bar. Plenty of rappers could describe violence. Von made you feel like you were sitting in the passenger seat while it happened. Growing up in Parkway Gardens on the south side of Chicago, known to everyone as O Block, Von accumulated multiple arrests and jail time before he ever stepped in a booth. His collaboration with Lil Durk gave him a launch pad, but it was his storytelling that kept people coming back. But his lyrics named names, referenced specific conflicts, specific people. On November 6, 2020, outside a nightclub in Atlanta, a parking lot altercation escalated into gunfire. Von was 26. Surveillance footage circulated everywhere within hours. A rapper from a rival crew was charged in connection with the killing, and this is what Von's death crystallized. Does telling true stories in music paint a target on your back, or is the music just reflecting what was always happening? Drill's defenders say the violence exists with or without the songs. Its critics say naming your enemies in tracks with millions of views is functionally a provocation. Von's story doesn't give you a clean answer either way. 26 years old, 7 days past his breakthrough project, gone. If you think that's a painful timeline, wait until you hear about Young Dolph, a man who survived multiple assassination attempts only to be killed buying cookies. Young Dolph. Young Dolph was the guy who survived everything until he didn't. Born in Chicago but raised in Memphis, Dolph built his entire career independently through his label, Paper Route Empire, without leaning on any major label backing. That alone made him a rare model of self-determination in hip-hop. But independence came with its own risks. No label security, just his wits and street smarts. He wasn't just lucky once or twice. Dolph survived multiple attempts on his life over the years, the most notorious being a 2017 shooting in Charlotte. His SUV was riddled with bullets, like a car wash gone very wrong. He leaned into this survival narrative consistently, using it as proof of his resilience in tracks and interviews. That untouchable aura became part of his brand. Throughout the 2010s, he dropped a steady stream of projects while feuding openly with Memphis heavyweights like Yo Gotti and Black Youngsta. These conflicts spilled from social media to real life, adding fuel to the fire, but never quite seeming fatal until November 17th, 2021. That day, he was visiting Makita's homemade butter cookies in Memphis, a local business he openly supported. The irony stings. An artist who uplifted his community was gunned down in broad daylight at a cookie shop, shot through the storefront window. Multiple armed suspects with alleged gang ties were arrested, but the case revealed tangled questions about who actually ordered the hit and how it fits into Memphis's ongoing cycle of organized violence. Dolph's death exposed a brutal dissonance. Here was a man devoted to his city, repeatedly surviving against all odds, only to lose his life in what should have been one of his safest, most familiar places. Memphis mourned deeply. The city had lost not just a rapper, but a symbol of grinding independent spirit who put Memphis on the map in a way nobody else did. Dolph was bulletproof for years, but sometimes surviving it all ends in the most unexpectedly tragic way. But if you thought surviving multiple shootings was the ultimate in rapper resilience, wait until you hear what happened to Takeoff. Takeoff. Here's the thing about every other name on this list. There's a thread you can pull, a beef that escalated, a robbery gone wrong, a lifestyle that caught up, something that, if you squint hard enough, you can trace back to a decision, a moment, a choice that put them in harm's way. Takeoff breaks that pattern completely. Kersnick Kari Ball was born June 18th, 1994, in Lawrenceville, Georgia. He rose to fame as one-third of Migos alongside his uncle Quavo and cousin Offset, and together they basically rewired how rap sounded for an entire decade. The triplet flow, the melodic ad-libs, the cultural dominance of Bad and Boujee and the Culture album series. That was Migos. And within Migos, Takeoff was quietly the most technically gifted rapper of the three. Fans called him the secret weapon, the one whose verses you had to rewind because the precision was almost absurd. But off the mic, he was the quiet one, reserved, low drama, the guy who showed up, wrapped circles around everyone, and went home. No public beefs, no headlines for the wrong reasons, just work. On November 1st, 2022, Takeoff was at a private gathering outside a bowling alley in Houston. Dice game, social event, nothing unusual. An argument broke out between other people. Not his argument, not his problem. He was standing nearby, stray bullets. He was 28. That's it. That's the whole story. No escalation, no retaliation cycle, no robbery, no feud, just a quiet man standing in the wrong 3 square feet of concrete while someone else's dispute turned lethal. And that's what makes this one sit different than every other entry on this list. You can't learn a lesson from it. You can't say, well, if he hadn't done X because he didn't do anything. He was the member of the most influential rap group of the 2010s who specifically avoided unnecessary conflict. And it didn't matter, not even a little bit. His death didn't spark a conversation about rap beefs or street politics. It sparked a conversation about the simple, terrifying math of American gun culture, that firearms at a social gathering plus any minor disagreement can equal a dead bystander. And that being talented, successful, famous, and peaceful offers you exactly zero protection from that equation. Sometimes the pattern is that there is no pattern. Sometimes it's just proximity. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.